They brought her to his cabin at dusk, shackles glinting like broken promises against her cobalt skin. The colony officials told him it was his right, his reward for 30 years of service. But Samuel Hart had buried the woman he loved beneath the oak tree outside his window, and he knew the difference between intimacy and cruelty. When they locked the door and left them alone, he did something no one on the colony had done before. He saw her. Before we dive in, let us know where you're watching from, and if stories like this move you, hit that subscribe button, because tomorrow's episode is even more unbelievable than this one. The cabin door opened with the sound of old hinges protesting against autumn wind. 2 colony guards stood in the threshold, backlit by the bruised purple of a frontier sunset, their rifles slung casual over shoulders that had forgotten what it meant to carry anything heavier than authority. Between them stood a girl whose skin shimmered like deep water under moonlight, cobalt blue and luminous, marked with patterns that shifted when she breathed. Her wrists were bound with polymer restraints that hummed faintly, a sound like insects dying in electric light. She did not look at Samuel Hart. She looked at the floor of his porch, bare feet curled against splinters, and her silver eyes held the exhausted blankness of someone who had learned that hope was a luxury afforded only to those who still believed the universe was fair. Samuel stood just inside the doorway, flannel shirt unbuttoned at the collar, sleeves rolled to his elbows, hands still dusted with the wood shavings from the chair he had been carving in the hour before they arrived. He was 53 years old, though the frontier had aged him in ways that numbers could not measure. His hair had gone gray at the temples, and his hands bore the scars of 30 years spent building shelters on a world that did not want humans there. But his eyes, green as the forests that surrounded the colony, still carried something the guards had long since lost. They carried memory of what it meant to hold someone gently. The taller guard, a man named Corporal Devlin, whose smile always arrived 3 seconds before his cruelty, stepped forward and gestured to the girl with the barrel of his rifle. "Your reward, Hart," Devlin said, voice slick with the kind of satisfaction that comes from enforcing rules written by people who never have to live under them. 30 years of service to the colony. You've earned this. She's been processed, cleaned, and cleared. No diseases, no complications. The Xylari are good for that much, at least. He chuckled, and the sound echoed off the wooden walls like stones thrown into a well. Samuel did not move. His gaze shifted from the guards to the girl, and he saw the way her shoulders tensed, the way her breath came shallow and quick, the way her fingers curled into fists, even though the restraints made resistance impossible. He saw the bruise along her collarbone, faint purple against blue skin, and the way her hair, long and pale as starlight, hung across her face like a veil she wished could hide her entirely. He saw all of this in the span of 3 heartbeats, and something inside him, something that had been dormant since the day he buried his wife 4 years prior, stirred like embers touched by wind. "I didn't ask for this," Samuel said quietly. Devlin's smile faltered, just slightly, like a mask slipping. "Doesn't matter what you asked for," the corporal replied, recovering quickly. "It's colony policy, veteran benefits. You worked the lumber mills, the farms, the construction sites. You built half this settlement with your own hands. The council decided you've earned a companion. She's yours for as long as you want her, or until she breaks, whichever comes first." The second guard, younger, with eyes that had not yet learned to hide discomfort, shifted his weight and glanced away. Devlin clapped Samuel on the shoulder, a gesture meant to be congratulatory but felt more like a threat. "Enjoy yourself, Hart. You've earned it." And then they were gone, boots heavy on the porch steps, their laughter fading into the distance as the woods swallowed them whole. Samuel stood in the doorway, the girl still on the porch, and the silence between them stretched like a wire pulled too tight. The wind moved through the trees, carrying the scent of pine and rain. Somewhere far off, a night bird called, lonely and searching. Samuel looked at the girl, really looked at her, and saw the tremble in her hands. The way her jaw was clenched so tight, he thought her teeth might crack. He saw the resignation in her posture, the way she had already decided what would happen next because it was the only thing that ever happened. And he saw Beneath all of that, the faintest flicker of something she was trying very hard to extinguish. Defiance. "Come inside," Samuel said, stepping back from the door, voice still quiet, still steady. "It's cold out there." The girl did not move. Her silver eyes lifted just enough to meet his for half a second before dropping again, and in that brief glance Samuel saw a question she did not dare ask aloud. Why was he being kind? Kindness, she had learned, was always a prelude to something worse. Samuel understood this without needing words. He had seen enough cruelty on the frontier to recognize its opposite when it appeared, and he knew that trust was not given freely when it had been beaten out of someone over and over again. He turned and walked deeper into the cabin, leaving the door open behind him. The interior was simple, functional, built by hands that understood the value of solid walls and warm fires. A stone hearth dominated one wall, flames crackling low and orange, casting shadows that danced across wooden beams. A table sat near the window, scarred from years of use, and a single chair, half-carved, rested beside it. The bed was in the corner, covered with a quilt his wife had made before the sickness took her, stitched with patterns that reminded him of summer fields and laughter that no longer echoed in these rooms. He did not look at the bed. He walked to the closet instead. The girl stepped inside, hesitant, her bare feet silent on the worn floorboards. She stood just past the threshold, hands still bound, body coiled like a spring ready to snap. Samuel opened the closet and pulled out a thick woolen blanket, forest green and heavy, the kind that held warmth through winter nights when the wind howled. He turned and crossed the room, holding the blanket in both hands, and stopped 3 feet away from her. Close enough to offer, far enough not to crowd. "You can sleep on the bed," Samuel said, nodding toward the corner. "I'll take the chair." He extended the blanket toward her, and for a long moment she simply stared at it, as if it were a weapon she did not recognize. Her lips parted slightly, breath catching, and her eyes searched his face for the lie, for the trap, for the moment when kindness would peel back and reveal teeth. But Samuel's expression remained unchanged. Patient, tired, sad in a way that had nothing to do with her, and everything to do with ghosts only he could see. Slowly, cautiously, she lifted her bound hands and took the blanket. The polymer restraints buzzed faintly as her fingers closed around the wool, and Samuel saw the way the metal had rubbed her wrists raw, skin broken and weeping in thin lines. His jaw tightened. "Those need to come off," he said quietly, gesturing to the restraints. Her eyes went wide, silver flaring with something between fear and disbelief. She shook her head quickly, a sharp, jerking motion, and stepped back. "No," she whispered, and it was the first word she had spoken. Her voice was soft, melodic, with an accent that curled around the edges of human language like water around stones. They said if you remove them, they will know. They will come back." Samuel exhaled slowly through his nose, anger simmering low in his chest, not at her but at the system that had taught her to be afraid of freedom. "They won't know," he said. "And even if they did, I'd tell them I took them off myself. You're not a prisoner here." Her gaze flickered to the door, then back to him, calculating, weighing the risk. "Everywhere is prison," she said, voice barely above a whisper. "Just different walls." Samuel felt something crack inside him, something small and sharp, because he recognized that truth. He had felt it himself after his wife died, when the colony council told him to keep working, keep building, keep contributing, as if grief were something that could be scheduled around shifts and quotas. He moved to the table and picked up a small tool, a wire cutter he used for his carvings, and held it up so she could see. "I'm going to cut them off," he said. "You don't have to trust me. You don't have to do anything. But you shouldn't have to wear those in your sleep." He waited, tool in hand, giving her the choice, giving her the power the guards had stripped away. She looked at the cutter, then at him, then down at her wrists where the restraints hummed their electric song, and after what felt like an eternity, she nodded once. Just once. Samuel approached slowly, movements deliberate and clear. He knelt in front of her, close enough now to see the intricate patterns that swirled across her cobalt skin, delicate as frost on glass, shifting with each breath she took. Up close, he could see the exhaustion carved into her face, the hollows beneath her eyes, the way her shoulders sagged under the weight of too many nights spent waiting for cruelty. "Hold still," Samuel said gently, and he slipped the wire cutter beneath the polymer band on her left wrist. The material was tough, designed to restrain without breaking, but Samuel's hands were strong from decades of labor, and the cutter bit through with a sharp snap. The restraint fell away, clattering against the floor, and the humming stopped. Silence rushed in to fill the space, sudden and startling, and Mira gasped, as if she had been holding her breath for hours. Samuel moved to the second restraint, cutting through it with the same careful precision, and when it fell, Mira brought her hands up to her chest, cradling her wrists as if they were newborn things, fragile and strange. The skin beneath the restraints was raw, angry red lines cutting through the blue, and she touched them gingerly, wincing. "Wait here," Samuel said, rising to his feet. He crossed to the small cabinet near the hearth and pulled out a tin of salve, something he used for burns and cuts from his work. He returned and held it out to her. "This will help," he said. She took it with trembling fingers, unscrewed the lid, and stared down at the pale ointment as if she had never seen medicine before. Perhaps she hadn't. Perhaps the colony had never bothered. She dipped 2 fingers into the salve and began to rub it across her wrists, movements slow and mechanical, and Samuel turned away to give her privacy. He walked to the bed and pulled back the quilt, smoothing it with hands that remembered tucking in someone he loved. Someone who used to hum while she folded laundry and laugh when he tried to dance in the kitchen. The memory came unbidden, sharp and sweet, and he let it pass through him without resistance. Grief was like that. It visited when it pleased, stayed as long as it wanted, and left only when it was ready. "You can sleep now," Samuel said, not looking at her, focusing instead on the quilt. The stitching his wife had labored over during the long winter months, when the snow piled higher than the windows. "No one will bother you." Mira stood frozen for a moment longer, clutching the blanket he had given her. And then, as if her legs could no longer support the weight of her confusion, she moved toward the bed. She sat on the edge, slowly, testing it as if it might collapse or transform into something terrible. When nothing happened, she lay down, still fully clothed, and pulled the blanket over herself, curling into a tight ball. Samuel watched her for a moment, saw the way her body remained tense even in rest, coiled and ready to flee. And then he turned away. He crossed to the chair near the table, the one he had been carving earlier, and lowered himself into it with a quiet exhale. The fire crackled in the hearth, casting warm light across the room, and outside the wind whispered through the trees like a lullaby sung in a language only the forest understood. Samuel leaned back, closed his eyes, and tried not to think about the fact that the Colony Council had turned suffering into a reward system, had taken beings who deserved dignity and reduced them to prizes for men who had earned nothing but the right to be left alone. Sleep came in fragments, broken and restless, and when dawn arrived it filtered through the windows in shades of gold and amber, painting the cabin in soft morning light. Samuel woke with a stiff neck and aching shoulders, the price of sleeping upright in a wooden chair, and he blinked against the brightness. The fire had burned down to embers, glowing faintly, and the cabin was quiet except for the sound of breathing. He turned his head slowly and saw that Mira was still asleep, curled beneath the blanket, her pale hair spilling across the pillow like water frozen mid-pour. Her face, in sleep, had softened, the hard edges of fear smoothed into something younger, more vulnerable. She looked like what she was, a girl who had been stolen from whatever life she once knew and forced into something no one should endure. Samuel rose carefully, joints protesting, and moved to the hearth. He added wood to the fire, coaxing it back to life, and then filled a kettle with water from the hand pump near the door. The familiar motions grounded him, gave him something to focus on other than the anger that simmered just beneath his ribs. He set the kettle over the flames and let the water heat, while he moved to the small pantry and pulled out bread, dried fruit, and a jar of honey his neighbor had given him months ago. Simple food, but enough. The sound of movement made him turn. Mira was awake, sitting up slowly, blanket clutched around her shoulders, silver eyes wide and startled, as if she had forgotten where she was. She looked at Samuel, then at the room, then back at Samuel, and her expression shifted through confusion, wariness, and something that might have been the faintest edge of relief. "You stayed," she said, voice hoarse from sleep. It was not a question. It was an observation, spoken with the disbelief of someone who had expected to wake to violence or absence. Samuel nodded. "I told you I would," he said simply, as if keeping promises were the most ordinary thing in the world, as if the world had not taught her that promises from men in power were nothing but lies dressed in pleasant words. Mira stood slowly, legs unsteady, and the blanket slipped from her shoulders, pooling at her feet. She looked down at her wrists, at the angry red lines that circled them like accusatory fingers, and then up at Samuel. "Why?" she asked, and the word hung in the air between them, heavy with all the questions she did not know how to voice. Why had he not touched her? Why had he given her the bed? Why had he cut the restraints when he could have left them on? Why had he treated her like a person when the galaxy had spent so long convincing her she was not? Samuel set a plate on the table, arranging the bread and fruit with the same careful attention he gave to his woodwork. "Because you're not property," he said, voice quiet but firm, "and I'm not the kind of man who profits from someone else's suffering." He gestured to the chair across from him. "Sit. Eat. You look like you haven't had a decent meal in weeks." Mira hesitated, every instinct screaming at her to mistrust, to wait for the knife hidden behind kindness. But her stomach betrayed her, growling low and insistent, and hunger won over caution. She moved to the table and sat, perched on the edge of the chair as if ready to bolt at the first sign of danger. Samuel poured hot water into 2 cups, added leaves from a small tin, and slid one across the table to her. "Tea," he said, "nothing fancy, but it's warm." Mira wrapped her hands around the cup, feeling the heat seep into her fingers, and brought it to her lips. The taste was bitter, earthy, unfamiliar, but it was warm and real, and hers. She drank slowly, watching Samuel over the rim of the cup, trying to understand what kind of man sat across from her. He did not look like the others, the guards, the officials, the colonists who leered when she was marched through the settlement in chains. They looked at her and saw a thing to be used. Samuel looked at her and saw something else, something she had almost forgotten she could be. "What is your name?" Samuel asked, breaking the silence. Mira lowered the cup, fingers tightening around the ceramic. No one had asked her name in so long she almost did not remember it herself. She had been called girl, alien, Xylari, thing, but never by the name her mother had given her in the blue forests of her home world before the ships came and turned everything to ash. "Mira," she said, finally, voice barely louder than the crackle of the fire. "My name is Mira." Samuel nodded, and something in his expression softened. "Mira," he repeated, testing the syllables, giving them weight and respect. "I'm Samuel. Samuel Hart." He paused, then added, "You're safe here, Mira, for as long as you need." The words landed between them like stones dropped into still water, ripples spreading outward, touching places Mira had thought were sealed shut forever. Safe. The word felt foreign in her mouth, tasted like something she had read about in stories but never experienced. Safety was a myth on the frontier, a luxury reserved for those born human and free. She was neither, and yet, sitting in this small cabin with morning light spilling through the windows and the smell of bread filling the air, she felt the smallest crack in the armor she had built around herself. It was dangerous, that crack. It let hope in, and hope was the cruelest thing of all. Samuel did not press her for conversation. He ate in silence, tearing small pieces of bread and chewing thoughtfully, gaze drifting occasionally to the window where the forest stretched endlessly, green and ancient and indifferent to the struggles of those who lived within its shadow. Mira watched him, studied the way he moved with no urgency, no expectation, as if time were something he had made peace with long ago. His hands were scarred, knuckles rough and calloused, but they moved with a gentleness that contradicted their appearance. These were hands that built things, that created, rather than destroyed. She wondered what those hands had held before her, who they had touched, with tenderness. After they finished eating, Samuel stood and began clearing the table. Mira rose quickly, instinctively reaching for the plates. "I can do that," she said, voice tight with the automatic response of someone who had been trained to serve. Samuel shook his head. "You're a guest," he said simply. "Guests don't do dishes." The word guest struck her like a slap, not because it was cruel, but because it was kind. She had been called many things, but never a guest. Guests were welcomed. Guests had choices. Guests could leave. She stood frozen, plate still in her hand, and Samuel gently took it from her. "Go sit by the fire," he said. "Warm yourself. You're still shaking." Mira had not realized she was trembling until he said it, but now she felt it, the way her body vibrated with the aftershocks of too much fear, held for too long. She moved to the hearth and lowered herself onto the stone ledge beside it, letting the heat wash over her. The fire crackled and popped, sending sparks up the chimney, and she stared into the flames, mesmerized by their dance. Behind her, she heard the quiet sounds of Samuel washing dishes, water sloshing, ceramic clinking gently. Domestic sounds, normal sounds, sounds that belonged to a life she had thought was impossible. "Why did they send me to you?" Mira asked suddenly, voice cutting through the quiet. Samuel paused, hands still submerged in the water. "Because the Colony Council thinks 30 years of labor earns a man the right to own someone," he said, bitterness seeping into his tone. "They think loneliness is something you cure with cruelty." Mira turned to look at him, silver eyes catching the firelight. "And you?" she asked. "What do you think?" Samuel dried his hands on a cloth, movement slow and deliberate, and turned to face her. "I think the council is wrong about a lot of things," he said. "I think they've built a system that turns people into commodities and calls it progress. I think they've forgotten what it means to be decent." He paused, gaze distant. "My wife used to say that a society is only as strong as how it treats its most vulnerable." She was right. The mention of his wife hung in the air like incense, sacred and sorrowful. Mira saw the way his shoulders sagged slightly, the way his eyes went somewhere else, somewhere she could not follow. "She died?" Mira asked softly. Samuel nodded. 4 years ago, sickness swept through the colony, took her in 3 days. He swallowed hard. "I buried her under the oak tree outside. She loved that tree, used to sit under it in the evenings and watch the sun set." He looked at Mira then, really looked at her, and his expression was raw with a grief that had not dulled with time. "I know what it's like to lose everything," he said, "to be treated like you don't matter, so no, I won't do that to you. I won't do that to anyone." The silence that followed was different from the ones before. It was not empty or tense. It was full, weighted with understanding that did not need elaboration. Mira felt something shift inside her chest, something that had been locked tight for so long she had forgotten it was there. Trust. Not complete, not yet, but the beginning of it, the seed of it. She wanted to say something, to thank him, to tell him that what he had done mattered more than he could possibly know, but words felt inadequate, too small to carry the weight of what she felt. So instead, she simply nodded and turned back to the fire. The day passed in quiet rhythms. Samuel worked on his carving, hands moving with practiced ease as he shaped wood into something beautiful. Mira watched from the hearth, fascinated by the transformation, the way formless material became art under his attention. He did not speak much, but occasionally he would glance up and their eyes would meet, and in those moments she felt seen. Not as an object or a curiosity, but as a person. It was a strange feeling, being seen. It made her want to cry and laugh at the same time. By afternoon, the sound of boots on the porch shattered the peace. Mira's body went rigid, fear flooding back in an instant. Samuel set down his carving and stood, jaw tight. The door swung open without a knock, and Corporal Devlin stepped inside, smile sharp as broken glass. Just checking in, Hart, Devlin said, gaze sliding to Mira with undisguised interest, making sure everything's to your satisfaction. Samuel stepped between Devlin and Mira, blocking the corporal's view with his body. Everything's fine, Samuel said, voice flat, devoid of warmth. You can leave now. Devlin's smile widened, predatory and amused. Come on, Hart, don't be modest. How's she working out? The council wants feedback, quality control, you understand. He tried to peer around Samuel, craning his neck. She giving you any trouble? We can always bring the restraints back if she's not cooperating. Samuel's hands curled into fists at his sides, knuckles whitening. She's not a piece of equipment, he said, voice dangerously quiet. And I don't need the council checking in on my personal life. Devlin's expression shifted, amusement draining away, replaced by something colder. Careful, Hart, he said, voice dropping to a warning. You're a veteran, sure, but that doesn't mean you're untouchable. The council granted you a privilege. Don't make them regret it. He stepped closer, close enough that Samuel could smell the synthetic tobacco on his breath. If you're not going to use her properly, maybe we should reassign her to someone who will. Plenty of men would be grateful for what you're wasting. Samuel felt rage boil up inside him, hot and consuming. The kind of anger he had not felt since the day he watched his wife's casket lowered into the ground while colony officials stood around checking their data pads and discussing production quotas. Get out, Samuel said, each word deliberate and sharp as a blade. Devlin blinked, surprised. What did you just say? Samuel took a step forward, and despite being unarmed, despite the rifle slung over Devlin's shoulder, there was something in his posture that made the corporal hesitate. I said, get out of my house, Samuel repeated, louder now, voice carrying the weight of 3 decades spent building things while men like Devlin tore them down. Mira is under my roof, which means she's under my protection. You don't get to come in here and treat her like livestock. You don't get to threaten her or me. Now leave. The younger guard who had accompanied Devlin shifted uncomfortably near the doorway, hand hovering near his sidearm but making no move to draw it. Devlin's face flushed red, jaw working as he processed the insubordination. For a long moment, the cabin was silent except for the crackling fire and the sound of Mira's shallow breathing behind Samuel. Then Devlin laughed, but it was hollow, forced. You're making a mistake, Hart, he said, backing toward the door. The council hears about this. You'll lose more than a companion. You'll lose everything. Samuel did not flinch. Then they'll have to take it, he said, because I'm done pretending this system is anything other than barbaric. Devlin's smile vanished completely. He stared at Samuel for 3 long seconds, then turned and stalked out, boots heavy on the porch. The younger guard followed, glancing back once with an expression Samuel could not read. The door closed, and silence rushed back in like water filling a broken dam. Samuel stood motionless for a moment, adrenaline still coursing through his veins, fists still clenched. And then he exhaled slowly and turned. Mira was standing by the hearth, eyes wide, body trembling not with fear this time but with something else. Disbelief, wonder. She stared at Samuel as if he had just performed an impossible miracle, as if he had caught lightning in his bare hands and survived. You stood up for me, she whispered, voice cracking on the last word. You could lose everything, and you stood up for me. Samuel crossed the room and stopped a respectful distance away, giving her space, always giving her space. You're worth standing up for, he said simply, as if it were the most obvious truth in the universe. Everyone is. Mira's composure shattered. The walls she had built, brick by brick, moment by moment, year by year, came crashing down all at once. She sank to her knees, shoulders shaking, and tears spilled down her cobalt cheeks like silver rain. Not tears of sadness, though there was sadness in them. Not tears of fear, though fear still lived in her bones. These were tears of release, of pressure finally escaping, of a soul that had been compressed for so long it had forgotten how to expand. Samuel knelt beside her, not touching, just present, and let her cry. He did not tell her to stop, did not tell her it would be okay, did not offer empty platitudes. He simply sat with her in her grief and her relief and her confusion, and he waited. Because that was what decent people did. They waited, they witnessed, they honored the pain of others without trying to fix it or dismiss it or make it more comfortable for themselves. And when Mira's tears finally slowed, when her breathing steadied, and she looked up at him with red-rimmed silver eyes, Samuel offered her his hand. Not a command, not an expectation, an offering, a choice. Mira looked at his hand, scarred and calloused and open, and after a moment she placed her own hand in his. Samuel helped her to her feet, and they stood there in the firelight, two people who had lost too much and survived anyway, two people the system had tried to break who refused to stay broken. "What happens now?" Mira asked, voice hoarse. Samuel considered the question. Outside, the wind was picking up, clouds gathering on the horizon, a storm approaching. Inside, the fire burned warm and steady. "Now," Samuel said, "we figure it out together. The council will come eventually. They'll try to take you back, but I won't let them, not without a fight." Mira searched his face, looking for doubt, for hesitation, for the moment when his courage would falter. She found none. "Why are you doing this?" she asked. Though she had asked before and knew the answer would not change, Samuel smiled, sad and small but genuine. "Because my wife taught me that the measure of a man isn't what he takes. It's what he's willing to give up to do what's right."